Every so often a story just comes out of left field and it completely surprises me, shocks me, and makes me think, I just have to read this for all of you. This one is weird, wonderful, and it's going to surprise you. Wherever you think this goes from the start is definitely not where it ends up, and that's pretty much all I can tell you without ruining the surprise. You're going to love this one. It's incredibly well written. It's a roller coaster ride, and let me not say anything else. Let's just get on with it. So, here we go tonight, my dear friends, with The Butcher on Barker Street by Impossible Bit 995. Part 1. The call came in a little after 3 in the morning. When I reached over to the nightstand, I accidentally knocked over my alarm clock. It crashed to the ground, shattering into jagged shards of plastic and glass. Not a good way to start the day. I answered the phone. Look, whoever this is, you owe me a new alarm clock. Get over here. I recognized Troy's voice immediately. We have a problem. A please would be appreciated. Stow the snark, James, he said. This is serious. I looked around my empty bedroom. There were piles of clothes strewn about the floor, along with old gin bottles and spent cigarette butts. Last night was a haze of loud music and endless drinking. Well, I couldn't be sure, but my breath said I'd ordered a pizza too. Looking down at the bits of plastic and glass, I said, Fine, but while I got you on the line, let me tell you a little bit about this new alarm clock you're going to buy me. While I got dressed, I went on and on about the clock. Yeah, I wanted one that could connect to the internet, play music and use Bluetooth. Troy was quiet as I rambled. When I was finished, he said, I'm at Brownstone on 32nd, apartment 25. Move your ass, we're burning daylight. Outside the bedroom window, the sky was dark and amassed with clouds. There wasn't daylight yet to burn. The call disconnected and I pocketed my cell phone. I swiped my jacket from the floor. There was a slight bulge in the breast pocket. My cigarettes are still there then. I grabbed my keys, wallet, and handgun from the dresser. On the way out, I stopped in the bathroom to brush my teeth, but even after relentlessly scrubbing with cheap cinnamon-flavored toothpaste, my breath still smelled like greasy pizza and gin. Well, some things never come out no matter what you do. Driving to the south side of town, I found the brownstone Troy had told me about and stepped inside. The inner walls were white and barren, save for a few odd holes and yellow cigarette stains. The carpet was fuzzy and mottled by discolored blotches. I'm not one to judge. My place wasn't much better. The rent was a little more expensive because I lived on the east side, but otherwise they were pretty much the same. In the city, in life, you've got to do whatever it takes to get by. Even if it means living in a rat-infested apartment where neighbors blared screamo music and there was asbestos in the walls. Climbing 2 flights of stairs, I knocked twice on the door to the apartment number 25. Footsteps thundered from inside, followed by the rattle of a chain lock being disarmed. The door opened, and Troy peered out at me through a crack in the door. This better be good, I said, rubbing the exhaustion from my eyes. I was having a great dream. Yeah, look, you can tell me about it later, he said, throwing the door open and pulling me inside. He slammed the door shut behind us, locking it again. Word of warning. Situation's a little tricky. In our line of work, when wasn't it tricky? Well, Troy had your typical bouncer look. Broad-shouldered, short blonde hair, lantern jaw, built like a linebacker. He wore dark denim pants and a grimy leather jacket with more years on it than most cars. He was the kind of guy Mr. Rousseau liked to keep for the first half of the day because he was well-read and personable. Intimidating at first glance, but in private company he was quiet and reserved. These were the hours Mr. Rousseau handled the legitimate side of the business. Plus, mornings and early afternoons were the only hours that worked for Troy's schedule since he had a wife and 2 kids. Wait a minute. Troy leaned in close and sniffed. Are you drunk? Not entirely. What the fuck, James? It's a Thursday. Yeah, and Mr. Rousseau usually has me on at night, so why the hell am I being called in at 3 in the morning? He gestured for me to follow as he started down the hallway. I didn't recognize the apartment. Mr. Rousseau lived on the north side of town, and Troy had a house on the west side. The south side of the city was reserved for addicts, deadbeats, and broke college kids. There weren't many in Rousseau's personal circle that fit that bill. We turned at the corner and followed the rest of the hallway to a closed door. Troy hesitated with his hand on the knob, looking over his shoulder at me. There were shadows in his eyes, despair. He sighed and turned the knob, pushing the door open. Instantly, before I'd even entered the bedroom, I could taste the metal and copper in the air, smell the early stages of decay. If something like that doesn't wake you up, nothing will. The bedroom was a dingy space with splintered floorboards and a sagged ceiling. An expat rainstorm would probably knock out a few tiles. The furniture was ancient and dilapidated. In the far corner, an old boxy TV displayed a screen of black and white fuzz, hissing quietly in the background as we examined the scene. What the fuck happened? I asked. Any semblance of drunkenness had abandoned me, replaced by a stone-cold sobriety that made me want to scream or punch something. There was an incident, Troy said haphazardly. Always the professional. It's a bit complicated. That was one way of putting it. On the queen-size bed was a partially naked girl lying limp on the mattress. Sheets and blankets swirled around her, spattered in blood. Her limbs were splayed at odd angles, lifeless. The back of her head was caved open with a jagged rim of exposed skull peering out through her long black hair. I kneeled to inspect the wound, thinking Troy had maybe brought me in for amateur medical attention. I spent the first 18 years of my life working on a farm, caring and tending to animals. Whenever I wasn't slaughtering them, that is. Adjusting the head of a nearby lamp on the nightstand, a bright yellow light shone against the top of the girl's head. Her injury was untreatable in given circumstances. Blunt force trauma with noticeable swelling and severe hemorrhaging. The skin was ruddy red with a slight undertone of blue. There were tiny bits of bone, hair and flesh amongst the exposed grey matter of her brain. I almost suggested a hospital in the area, but reality dawned on me. I would have been better off suggesting a morgue. Then, as I was examining the wound, the girl's brain began to shift beneath the undulating pool of blood. For a moment, I thought she might open her eyes and sit up in bed. This expectation died in its cradle as I watched a fly crawl out from the mixture of blood and membrane. His wings fluttered a few times, and once they were clean, it took off into the air. I quickly turned away, gagging against last night's dinner. I shouldn't have had so much pizza or gin, but, well, I'm a creature of habit. Seriously? I stammered, leaning against the wall, staring down at my shoes, desperately trying not to think about the dead girl. What the fuck happened? I already told you. There was an incident. Yeah, no shit, there was an incident. Look, it was an accident, James. You don't get an injury like that from an accident unless it involves a head-on collision or a flight of stairs. An accident. Well, that makes it so much better. I glimpsed at the girl again, my heart swelling with a mixture of disgust and pity. Is she, dead? I don't know why I asked. She had the pale complexion of a corpse, the putrid stink of a corpse, probably had the sour taste of one too. Troy shrugged. Oh, my gut tells me she's most likely dead. Most likely? No, yeah, she's dead. He considered this for a moment before nodding. Definitely dead. Mr. Rousseau clubbed her over the head with an ashtray. I exhaled carefully. That ought to do it. I reached inside my jacket pocket and removed a pack of Viceroy cigarettes, lighting one the instant it met my lips. Why'd he do it? I lost his cool for a second. Really? Only for a second? Troy threw his hands up defensively. Look, I was just chilling in the living room, reading a book when I heard her scream. By the time I got in here, well, it was finished. Did he say anything? Wants us to clean it up. No shit, Sherlock. I mean, did he say anything about why he did it? Troy scoffed. Oh, yeah, he actually wrote a 10-page essay about it if you're interested in reading it. I considered punching him, but The only reason Troy and I had lasted as partners was because we knew not to take it out on each other. We had an unspoken policy. Just do the job and get out. No questions asked. In situations like that, though, it was hard to refrain from asking any questions. Well, I said, slowly regaining my equilibrium with the help of nicotine calming my nerves. Where the hell is Rousseau? Don't worry about it. I called some guys to take him back to his penthouse. We gotta fix this fast. The girl has a roommate. She's out of town right now, but she'll be back around noon. Oh, we are so fucked. Not if we move fast, Troy promised. I've already got it figured out. I'll stay here and clean up the mess. I just need you to take care of the body. Fuck you. I'm not driving a dead body through the city at 3 a.m. I'll stay and clean up the scene. You can deliver the girl. I can't. Why not? I, don't have a license. It hasn't stopped you before. Oh, my tags are expired too. That's when it hit me. Fucking forget about it. We're not putting a dead girl in the trunk of my car. Why not? Because it's my personal vehicle, dumbass. It's a minivan, not a Maserati. Yeah, it's still my car. I'm not letting you fuck it up. It's what soccer moms use to drive their kids to school. Little blood isn't going to ruin it. I started pacing back and forth across the room, and the floorboards creaked beneath my feet. The nicotine was making me sick, and my sleep deprivation wasn't helping either. Troy groaned, exasperated. Will you please just be cool about this? We don't have to bicker like an old married couple. We need to get this fixed now. Son of a bitch. I kicked the wall. Dried paint chips fell to the floor. Okay, alright, fine. What's the play? I got some plastic wrap and a few blankets. We'll bundle her up, carry her downstairs, and load her into the trunk. Then you'll take her to one of the usual spots. By usual spots, he meant one of the local businesses we use to dispose of bodies. There were a few throughout the city, but my go-to was Mason & Sons, a funeral home on the north side of town. Mason was a pleasant man, despite his affiliation with someone like Mr. Rousseau. And his means of disposal was perhaps the most humane I could think of, better than the scrapyard or the butcher shop. We exited the apartment, went downstairs and stepped out into the parking lot. Troy's car was near the back corner, far away from the rest. He opened the trunk and removed the top panel. Beneath, where there should have been a spare tire, was instead a cache of random supplies for situations like this. Handcuffs, duct tape, zip ties, trash bags, bleach soap, ammonia, disinfectant wipes, paper towels, and whatever else. I almost made a joke about how maybe he should be driving the minivan, but I couldn't get the thoughts from my mind to my tongue without wanting to puke. So I just silently smoked my cigarette instead. Back in the apartment, we gathered everything covered in blood into one of the trash bags. We also threw in some of the girl's personal belongings like her wallet, keys, and cell phone. Troy took whatever excess cash from her purse, asking me if I wanted to split it. You fucking scumbag, I muttered. Oh, forgive me, Prince Charming, he said. Some of us got bills to pay. More like alimony. Troy cuffed me on the shoulder for that one. In this line of work, it was hard to have a family, especially on nights when you had to gaze into the emaciated face of a young dead girl, trying not to think of your own daughter or wife. You have to lie to yourself. Detach yourself from the situation. Pretend that you can still be the good guy, but ultimately, guilt always resurfaces. Usually late at night, while you're in bed listening to the silence of the world around you, staring up at the shadows on the ceiling like ink blots on a Rorschach test. I see a happy little dog, you might say. I see a pretty pink pony. I see the shattered skull of a young woman. I see the maggots wriggling around inside her brain. I see myself protecting the man who killed her because I'm just a dog on a leash. Yep, guys like us develop hobbies to distract ourselves from the silence, from the memories. Troy was a frequent reader of everything and anything. I'd seen him consume more books than a librarian. Once I even caught him reading the dictionary because he didn't have any other novels on hand. And for me, I liked to drink and smoke. Help me sleep. Help me clear my mind. When I wasn't drinking, I was working. And my occupation was a complicated matter, if that weren't already apparent. I usually followed Mr. Rousseau around like a good old little pup, going all across the city to visit underground clubs, bars, and other late-night establishments with morally questionable exchanges. If I wasn't acting as Mr. Rousseau's bodyguard or personal assistant, I was off collecting debts and payments. Or that, or I was delivering packages. Most of the time I had no clue what these packages contained, but I had my assumptions: narcotics, money, evidence, and so on. Once I had to deliver a sphere-shaped package wrapped in duct tape and plastic. I kept telling myself it was a basketball or soccer ball, but my gut told me otherwise. That was the first time I'd met the butcher. When I handed in the package, he licked his lips and said, "This'll do just fine." I avoided the butcher when at all possible. Part 2. By the time Troy and I finished collecting personal belongings, we had 2 bags full. I delivered those to the trunk of my car, and when I returned, Troy had already got the girl enveloped in cellophane. We were somewhat skilled in the trade of making a person disappear. We wrapped the girl in a few blankets and quilts. One of them was pink and had the word Barbie scrawled across it in swooping letters. "So," I said, "your daughter fell out of her doll phase then?" That's what happens when you get them a cell phone. The last time we did this, we used blankets designed with monster trucks and SpongeBob. His son had just turned 11 and got an Xbox with games like Call of Duty and Halo. Once the blankets were in place, we secured them with duct tape. Then, after checking the apartment hallways, we carried the body to the parking lot. The sun was just starting to peer over the horizon, but morning traffic still hadn't hit yet. With the body inside, Troy shut the trunk and sighed. "Hey, you gonna take her to the butcher?" "No," I said, a little too quickly to be impartial on the matter. "Mason's place." "Butcher's closer." "She's going to Mason, end of story." He shrugged and checked his watch. "I'll better get moving before he gets busy then." "No shit," I said, climbing into the car and starting the engine. "Have fun, Mr. Clean." Grumbling, he waved me away and headed back towards the building. "Hey, I'm serious about that alarm clock," I called out after him. "It better be expensive and brand new." Troy flipped me off over his shoulder and disappeared inside. I shifted into drive and started across the city, careful to obey the speed limit and stop at all traffic lights. Yeah, the last thing I needed was to catch any unwanted attention. While I was driving, my hands began to shake. The road oscillated in front of me, fusing with the night sky. Stars blurred and coalesced into a single bright light of fluorescent white. I rubbed my eyes and searched the glove box, returning with a hand-sized bottle of gin. It steadied my nerves, placating the adrenaline coursing through my veins. Well, a man without his medicine goes a little mad from time to time. At Mason and Son's funeral home, I parked in the back. I tried calling him, but it went straight to voicemail, so I climbed the back steps to the rear entrance and knocked. It took a few minutes, but eventually his wife appeared. Her smile vanished, and she looked at me with discernible disgust. "It's 4:30 in the morning," she growled. "Nice to see you too, Sheila," I replied, affecting a delicate tone. She, like many others, preferred Troy over me, but she could have probably gone the rest of her life without ever speaking to either one of us again. "Yeah, Mason here?" She stepped aside, waving me inside. "He's in the back office. Be quick about it. We've got a family coming in at 5. "You could try to be a little nicer. Mr. Rousseau pays you to keep the fucking lights on in this place, you know." Her scowl deepened, forming lines across her forehead, accentuating the hollow crevices around her sunken eyes. She reeled back and slapped me across the face. "Make it snappy, you rat fucking. Get the hell out of here." Fair enough. I rubbed the sting from my cheek and moved down the hallway. That's when I bumped into two of Mason's sons. I didn't remember their names, and they probably didn't remember mine either, but we were familiar with each other. A while back, Mr. Rousseau made me retrieve the older one from a crack den on the south side while the kid was on a bender. I had to fend off 2 different dealers and a chihuahua that wouldn't stop nipping at my heels. Because of the younger son, I'd had to visit a few families on the north side with a large cash settlement to keep them silent about something involving their teenage daughters. Oh, I don't know all the details, but the little bastard wasn't allowed to interact with any of the grieving customers who came in. Probably for the best, all things considered. The sons nodded at me and left. I continued down the hall into the back office. Inside, Mason was sat at his desk with a cup of coffee in one hand and a manila file in the other. He flipped through pages, squinting through a pair of tiny spectacles that were comically small. I had to wonder if he could even see through them. Despite his kids, Mason was a decent person. Well, as far as humans are concerned. He reminded me of my grandfather. An old oak tree slowly wilting while the rest of the forest was chopped down to make room for new shops and apartments. Just a man trying to stay afloat, willing to do whatever it took to keep his family safe and secure. Mason glanced up at me and smiled. "James, wasn't expecting you." "Sorry, Mason," I said. Tried to call, but there was no answer. "Phone's in the other room." He set his coffee down and closed the folder. Leaning forward on his desk, he clasped his hands together and asked, "What can I do for you, my boy?" He was from a different generation where people said things like, "my boy," or "simmer down," or, on occasion, such as when I brought his son home from the drug den, "Damn shame," while shaking his head. I sat in the chair across from him and explained the situation, well, what little I knew. When I was finished, Mason took off his spectacles, pinched the bridge of his nose, and exhaled. He tried to smooth back the wispy grey hair on his head, but there were so few left that they refused to obey. "The situation's a bit muddled," I told him, affecting Troy's professionalism. "We're trying to get it cleaned up as soon as possible. So if you have anything, I'd appreciate it. And I'm sure Mr. Rousseau would appreciate it too." Whenever dealing with these people, you have to throw out Mr. Rousseau's name as much as possible. The only way to get them to treat you seriously. The only way to keep their attention. Otherwise, you're just a rat fuck, a dog without an owner. Let me see," Mason said, flipping through a large black ledger. With every page, he licked his pruny fingers and hummed. Damn shame. Damn shame. Young girl, was it?" "Yes, sir. Not as young as you might think, but younger than either of us. Late teens, early 20s, maybe. I'm guessing a college student. Maybe a part-time escort." Rousseau met most of his paramours late at night while wandering the city's underbelly. Dancers at the clubs and waitresses at the bars. A repetitive routine that usually worked in his favor. "And how did it happen?" Mason asked. I hesitated. My tongue wouldn't form the words. Probably for the best you don't know, sir." He chuckled. It was easy to approach these situations with a little bit of humor when you weren't looking at the corpse. Even someone like Mason, who'd been embalming and burying bodies since before I could drive, would probably feel faint at the sight of that girl. He'd clutch his metaphorical pearls and blink back tears. Maybe spend the afternoon in his office, drinking from the bottle of bourbon he kept in the bottom drawer. "How soon would you need a hole?" Mason asked without looking up from his agenda. Today, if possible." The way Mason and Sons worked was we would deliver a body a few hours before a funeral. They'd dig the grave about 4 or 5 feet deeper than usual, and we'd drop the dead body inside. Then we'd cover them up with a few inches of dirt, just enough to conceal the corpse. Once the funeral was done, they'd transport the coffin and drop it down on top of the other corpse before sealing up the grave. When the body was taken care of, they burned all the evidence and possessions in their industrial furnace. At least, that's what they told me. But the last time I visited, his younger son was sporting a new wristwatch that seemed vaguely familiar. "I'm sorry to tell you," Mason said, leaning back in his chair and folding his arms across his chest. "But we just don't have any open graves right now. If you can hold on to the body for a few more days, we might have availability this weekend." We've got nowhere to store it until then. He cocked an eyebrow. Where is she now? My trunk. Mason blanched and reached for his coffee, his hand trembling as he lifted the mug to his lips. Sweet baby Jesus, you got her with you as we speak? That's what you're telling me? Yes, sir, unfortunately. Like I said, it's a bit of a snafu. No kidding, my boy. He rubbed the few strands of hair on his chin. I'm sorry, I wish I could help, but my hands are tied. I feigned nonchalance, but in reality my heart was pounding against my chest. Sweat beaded on the back of my neck. I kept thinking about that dead girl, the hole in her skull, the stew of bone shards and hair inside her head. I needed to get rid of her, to get her out of my trunk so I could go back home, drink myself stupid and fall asleep. Forget the day, let another replace it. Hey, you all right? Mason asked me. Can I get you a cup of coffee or tea? No, but thank you, sir. I had Jen waiting for me back in the car. I should, probably get going. You know, I'm surprised to see you again. Thought you would have taken your leave by now. That was a plan, wasn't it? Yes, sir, but things changed. Thought I'd have paid my debts by now, but the bills never stop coming. He laughed. You can say that again. Last winter, my father took a spill down the stairs and hit his head. While my mother was doing her best to sell the farm, there were no buyers. It was taking every last penny to keep her afloat while she waited for the life insurance policy to kick in. Bureaucrats always found a way to slow down the process. I stood from my chair, shook Mason's hand, and left. His wife followed me out of the door, giving me one last glare before slamming the door shut. When I got back into the car, I was overcome by the putrid stink of decay. I could practically taste the withering flesh, taste the metallic tinge of her blood in my mouth despite the layers of plastic and blankets. There must have been a hole or something, part that wasn't covered. I rolled down the window and turned on the AC. Then I retrieved my phone from my pocket and dialed Troy's number. 3 rings before he answered. Yeah, everything taken care of? Not quite. Great. What now? Mason doesn't have any open graves at the moment. I guess you'll have to go to the butcher, Troy said. My blood turned cold and I squeezed the steering wheel, digging my nails into the leather. No way. I'm not going to the butcher. Quit being such a baby and just do it. The guy's a freaking freak show. I'm not going there alone. Well, I'm a little preoccupied at the moment. Troy took a deep breath and sighed. You could try Davis's scrapyard. I don't have his number, so you'll have to drive over. He should be in by now. God, I wanted to smash my phone against the dashboard. Well, Mr. Rousseau paid well, but in some situations it wasn't enough. Rock and a hard place, I guess. Whatever, I said, exasperated. Just hurry up with the apartment. It'd go a lot faster if you didn't call. I hung up and tossed the phone into the passenger seat. My foot pressed against the accelerator, turning the faint glow of streetlights into a hazy smear of orange and yellow. Rain pattered against the windshield, and the rubber wipers squeaked against the glass. My hands fidgeted about the wheel, trembling whenever they didn't have something stable to grasp onto. I reached into my pocket for another cigarette. By the time I'd arrived at the scrapyard, I was stifling a gag between clenched teeth. The car reeked of burning tobacco and death. You could soak the inside with bleach, but the smell still wouldn't go away. Parking at the front gate, I found Davis in the main trailer, drinking a beer and throwing files into a trash can. He glanced over his shoulder at me, brow already furrowed, eyes bloodshot with fatigue. Nah, he said, no hesitation, no fear. Sorry, James, but I can't. You don't even know why I'm here. Don't need to, buddy. If you're here, it's probably something bad. He emptied an entire drawer of files into the trash can before tossing it aside. Trust me, this is the last place you want to be. Why's that? Last week, cops busted one of my garages. They've been watching my every move ever since. Whatever you're here for, I doubt you want to get me involved. Davis operated several chop shops across the city. On the surface, they were like any other garage, but in the back, they were stripping stolen cars for spare parts. Not exactly the worst of Mr. Rousseau's colleagues, but his operation was big and turned quite a profit. An influential man to have in your pocket. His scrapyard was convenient when it came to dead bodies. They had the kind of machinery that could crush a vehicle into a tiny cube. Imagine what it did to a corpse. Plus, there was plenty of land to bury bodies and plenty of rubbish to hide the stink of rotting humans. "It's just one girl," I said. "A slip of a thing. Wouldn't be hard for you to dispose of. Wouldn't take any time." He scoffed. "Maybe I'm not speaking clearly, but the cops are investigating me. They're looking into every single thing I do. Dead girl is just what they need to get a warrant. Shit, screw the warrant. That'd be enough for probable cause. We both be in cuffs, buddy. Is that what you want?" Sometimes prison seemed an easier sentence than working for Mr. Rousseau. But at the same time, it wouldn't change much. I'd still be a mud on a leash. I'd just have a different owner. Story of my life. Davis and I went back and forth, arguing about the logistics of the situation, but in the end I retreated to my car and started the engine again. I almost called Troy, but I already knew what he'd tell me. He'd been with me since I first left the brownstone. I had to go and see the butcher on Barker Street. Part 3. There were several reasons why I hated the butcher shop. The owner was a whack job, and I mean that as nicely as possible. The shop itself was, well, let's just say the meat wasn't exactly kosher, and worst of all, it reminded me of my childhood, of days on the farm with my father staring into the beady eyes of animals that would become burgers or steaks or sausages. When I turned 13, I no longer helped tend the fields. That was a job for my uncles. No, instead, I was in the slaughterhouse with my dad, cutting throats and hanging carcasses from hooks, skinning hides and carving meat from the bone. It was always cold and dark, and no matter how much I showered or scrubbed myself clean, there was always blood, either underneath my fingernails or in the creases of my skin, or, on occasion, in my hair. The day I turned 18, I moved out. Didn't even bother packing, I just took whatever I could carry and left. No letter, no goodbye, nothing. Maybe it wouldn't have been so bad if not for my father, but you don't get to choose your family, and sometimes you don't get to choose your vocation. It chooses you, or rather, it's a result of your circumstances. You're almost always doing something you hate for someone you despise. Just when you think you're about to escape, fate pulls you back in. Life is a cycle, blood in a sink circling the drain. As I drove away from the scrapyard, rain falling all around me, I noticed a pair of headlights reflected in the rearview mirror. Working for someone like Mr. Rousseau makes you paranoid, makes you jump to conclusions, and so I started taking random turns down roads I'd never visited. For a moment, it seemed I was free of my pursuer, but then through the darkness, the headlights appeared again, shining through the rear window, filling the interior of the car with their blinding light. They were getting brighter and brighter. The car was slowly closing in on me. Stay calm, I told myself. Just do the job and go home. There was a loud bump from the back, as if the body had shifted and smacked against the trunk. I glanced over my shoulder, expecting to see the girl sitting upright and looking at me through her cowl of blankets and quilts. But there was nothing other than those headlights. When I turned back round, I realized I was crossing onto the other side of the road and jerked the wheel in the opposite direction, swerving back into my lane. That's when the red and blue lights began to flash behind me. Oh, you've got to be shitting me, I thought, wishing I'd never visited Davis in the first place. I pulled onto the shoulder and parked. While the police cruiser settled a few feet behind me, I hid my bottle of gin in the center console. Desperately, I lit another cigarette and retrieved a pack of gum from the dash. By the time the officer finally climbed out of their car, My jaw was aching. Regardless, I unwrapped a few more pieces of gum and puffed on my cigarette. Watching them through my side mirror, my legs started bouncing with anxiety. There was another bump from the back. The police officer stopped halfway to my vehicle and removed their flashlights. The beam cut through the darkness, hovering over the rear of my car, aimed at the back window. Well, thankfully, my windows were tinted. Oh, come on, you prick, I thought. Just keep walking. Give me a ticket and get the hell out of here. The officer extinguished their flashlight and continued along the road. They stopped at the driver's side window and tapped against the glass with their knuckles. I rolled down the window and forced a half-hearted smile. "Good morning, officer." She looked at me with a blank stare. "You have any idea why I pulled you over?" "No, ma'am." "Well, you were swerving." "Really?" I hesitated, as if thinking about it. "I must have guessed, I drifted off there for a second. I won't let it happen again." She leaned in close, her face shadowed by the bill of her cap. Her eyes pierced into me, looking past my facade of normalcy, seeing the panic below, bubbling beneath the surface. Her nose twitched as she sniffed. "Have you been drinking, sir?" "No, ma'am, not since yesterday." She sniffed again, frowning, and her expression constricted with disgust. She could smell the decay, could smell the girl in the trunk. I pulled the cigarette from my lips and exhaled, hoping to cover it up, maybe distract her too. She waved away the smoke and drew back from the window. "You mind telling me where you're going at an hour like this?" "Just on my way, ma'am," I lied. "I was running a few errands after work." "Where do you work?" "Graveyard shift at the hospital. Maintenance and sanitation." The officer considered this carefully. There was doubt in her eyes, but she didn't press the issue any further. "I'm going to need your license and registration." "Of course." I reached into the glove box and retrieved the necessary paperwork. And then from my wallet I produced my ID. She took both and retreated to her vehicle. Once she was out of sight, I pulled out my phone and dialed Mr. Rousseau. It rang a few times and clicked. "What?" "I'm on 15th, South Side. I need a distraction immediately." "Give me 2 minutes." I watched through the rearview mirror as the officer entered my credentials into the system. Occasionally, she lifted her head and stared at the back of my car, knitting her eyebrows in confusion. Even if she didn't know, she could feel it, could feel that something was off, feel the pull of the dead girl in the trunk. People have a natural intuition for these things. They just don't always realize it. Before she could string the pieces together, a car came flying down the road toward us. It was moving too fast to make out the model or driver, but I'm sure it was one of Rousseau's guys. The officer turned on the emergency lights and pulled away from the curb, stopping alongside my car. I tossed my license and registration through the open window. "I'll leave you with a warning this time," she said before spinning around and going after the other driver. I leaned my head against the seat and exhaled. Then I removed the bottle of gin from the center console and took another drink. When I had my wits about me again, I started down the road for Barker Street. About 10 minutes later, I arrived at the butcher shop. It was almost 5:30. The butcher shop should have been open, but the sign in the window read, "Closed. Come back later." I pulled into the alleyway and parked at the back of the building by the loading dock. Not much in life scares me, but being there at the butcher's shop filled me with an inexplicable dread. I almost preferred to take the body home and put it in my bathtub until Mason or Davis could dispose of it. But that was a risk I don't think Mr. Rousseau would want me to take. So I climbed out of the driver's seat, stamped out my cigarette, and walked up to the rear entrance. I pounded my fist against the door and waited, counting every second that passed until it opened. The butcher was a bear of a man with thick black hair and an untrimmed beard. There were pale pink scars on his face and permanent wrinkles above his brow. His eyes were glacial and severe, Everyone shrunk under his scrutiny, even Mr. Rousseau on the rare instance when they were face to face. He wore an old white t-shirt splattered with old blood. A heavy leather apron was draped over his torso. He stank of meat and cleaning chemicals. I tried to smile, but he met me with enough indifference to make the smile falter. Now the butcher didn't play to social niceties, didn't recognize them as necessary. "What?" he growled, his voice heavy with the scratchy rasp of someone who'd been smoking their entire life. "I'm busy, boy. Make it quick." "Good to see you, too." Well, he started closing the door, and I slammed my palm against it, but the butcher was twice my size, if not larger, with double the mass and strength. The door continued to close, little by little. "I've got a body," I whispered. "I need your help." The butcher opened the door. "Can't. Too busy. Take your problems elsewhere, boy." "Yeah, see, I already did that. No one else is available. You're my last resort." "Ain't got the time." "Well, Mr. Rousseau would really appreciate it if you made time." This sparked a sense of urgency within him. He grunted and stepped outside of the shop. "Be fast about it, boy." Together we went to the trunk and unloaded the body. The butcher wasted no time at all, taking her by the head and lifting her out. I stumbled after him, trying to grab at the feet as he dragged her towards the back door. From there we carried her through the back of the shop, into the kitchen area, down a flight of steps leading to the basement. The upstairs was a very generic design, redolent of old diners with checkered floors and swinging light fixtures. Small wooden tables that could have been purchased at a flea market. The basement, though, was something from a nightmare. Barren stone walls coated in dust, cobwebs hanging in every corner, steel pipes wafting steam, narrow corridors that seemed to go on for an eternity. Well, truth be told, I'd only been to the butcher shop a handful of times, usually in the company of Troy, and I'd never set foot in the basement, never dared to cross the threshold, to descend into the abyss below. I knew what happened down here. I knew how the sausage was made and, if possible, wanted to refrain from venturing into the belly of the beast. But the butcher wasn't a man to negotiate, nor was he someone you wanted to piss off. So I held my tongue as we traversed those cramped halls, moving further and further into the underground. "Up here and to the left," the butcher said, swinging his head towards an open door. We stepped into a white-tiled room with a large metal slab that acted as a table. There were steel sinks along the right wall, and above them were two parallel magnetic strips with various cutlery detached. Hanging from the left wall was a generic medkit beside a large mirror. The butcher heaved the girl onto the table, dropping her down as if she were no more than a piece of meat. It occurred to me that within a few hours, that's exactly what she would have been. Grabbing a blade from the magnetic strip, he cut away the duct tape, peeling back the blankets and plastic wrap. Beneath this hastily made cocoon, the girl was pale-skinned and covered in blood. A wound had continued to drip and drain during the entirety of our ride, smearing across her face and clothes until she looked like Carrie on prom night. The butcher lifted his hand to her cheek, gently caressing the skin. For the first time ever, it seemed there was sadness in those cold eyes. His hand moved closer, lower, pressing against the torso and chest, grabbing at her limbs to maneuver them. "The flesh is tender," he said clinically. "The muscles are stiff, though. Rigor mortis is setting in. No good. She'll have to wait until the tension subsides." He checked his wristwatch and grumbled. "This won't do, but I'll keep her anyway." I was disgusted with his professionalism, disgusted with myself for having any part of this. I removed a cigarette from my jacket, and the butcher cracked me on the side of the head. He waved his finger the same way my father used to when I asked if I could work in the fields again. The butcher returned to the body, examining the head wound with a pensive stare. "This is no good. The brain suffered too much trauma. The meat's ruined." "Does anyone actually eat the brain?" He nodded emphatically. Every part of the carcass is vital, brains, bones, and all. I wondered then about all the people who came to his shop. Imagine them grabbing a pound of brisket or a flank of steak before heading home, while they'd fire up the grill and cook their newly acquired meat. Thought about how they might sit down with their families for some good old-fashioned barbecue. How the children would pick at their teeth afterward, trying to get the small pieces of fat out while Daddy Dearest loosened his belt a few notches and the mother wrapped leftovers in plastic. It made me sick to my stomach knowing what this girl would become. For a time, she might have been special, might have been treated to expensive drinks and potent narcotics. Mr. Rousseau probably took her by the arm and paraded her through some nightclub. A girl more than half his age with silky black hair and a lithe frame. A girl with friends and family and a roommate. A girl with no idea how her story would end. Carved and shredded and served. A meal to be dissolved in stomach acids until there was nothing left. God, my guilt wore on me like a shroud, especially since it wasn't being combated by the djinn. But would I even recognize her face in a few weeks when she inevitably appeared on the news? Would I remember driving all across the city with her in the trunk, sliding around like loose change? Probably not. By then, I'd be disposing of the next body, the next nameless victim Mr. Rousseau left in his wake. "What's wrong with you?" the butcher asked, anger sharpening his tone. "Why are you crying?" I dabbed at my cheeks. My fingertips came back wet. He was right, I was crying. "Where's the other one?" the butcher remarked. "Your partner. He's better for this. He doesn't cry or make a fuss." While he might have maintained an apathetic countenance, Troy had also read so many books that he could no longer discern the difference between fact and fiction, had lost touch with reality. He was on the verge of marital separation, of losing his house and possibly kids because his wife knew there was something wrong with him. She couldn't put her finger on it, couldn't suss it out, but her instincts told her to run as far as possible, to get away from this shadow of a man that disappeared for the first half of a day working a job she knew nothing about. We weren't necessarily dangerous people, but we were involved in dangerous activities, the kind that always came at a cost. But I didn't tell the butcher any of that. He wouldn't have cared even if I did. Those things simply didn't matter to someone like him. They existed outside his realm of comprehension. This shop was his world. These tiled walls and stone floors. The knives above the sink. The slab of meat on his table waiting to be cut open and pulled apart. Those were the only things that held any importance to him. Part 4. He began to paw at the girl's clothes, but there was something I couldn't bear to see. I delivered the body and helped clean up this mess, but whatever happened next wasn't part of my job description. "There are still some bags in the car," I said. "Personal possessions and whatever else." The butcher set aside his knife and nodded. "Go grab it, I'll dispose of it." And he waved me off. "Hurry, boy, I'm very busy, no time to dawdle." I slipped out of the room and started down the hall. About halfway, I stopped and turned over my shoulder. There was only darkness and stone, and I wondered how far it went. What else was beneath the butcher shop? Maybe storage or more freezers, maybe something else. As I stood there, gazing into the dark, I thought I heard someone speak. Didn't sound like the butcher. Didn't sound like anyone, really. Just an incoherent collection of hollow whispers, a whistling current of air snaking through the cracks in the walls. "Hello?" I called out. The butcher appeared from the doorway. What do you want?" He swung his head the other way, gazing down the opposite end of the hall. Then he turned back towards me. "Hurry, boy. Go get her things and bring them back. Then you can leave. I don't have time for your shenanigans." I shook off my anxiety and climbed the steps. Outside, I grabbed the 2 garbage bags from the trunk and closed it. On my way back inside, I saw a homeless man in the alleyway staring at me. There was blood pasted around the corners of his mouth and chunks of flesh in his beard. I looked down at his hands where he cupped a half-eaten rodent, a long-tailed rat with a few ribs exposed through the gore of its ensnared innards. The homeless man shifted away from me, returning to his meal with a voracious fervor. I stood there, blinking, waiting for the image to dissipate like a fever dream hallucination. But the man remained, as did the rat. Yeah, no. Fuck this, I thought, hurrying inside so I could drop off the bags and leave. When I was back in the basement, I moved down the narrow hallway at an awkward angle to accommodate both trash bags and keep them from grazing the rough cement walls. Turning left, I stepped into the slaughter room and tossed the bags against the wall. I swung my head towards the butcher, ready to say my farewells and leave. He was slumped against the sink, bleeding profusely and gurgling on his own blood. Slowly, he craned his head in my direction. The right side of his face appeared normal, but he continued turning and turning until I saw the gash on his left cheek. The skin had been brutally sawed away with a serrated blade. Through the blood and bits of stringy flesh, I could see his rotted molars peering at me. I could see his tongue, what remained of it, writhing inside his mouth. He collapsed to the floor with a dull thud, grunting incoherently, babbling about something while waving his hands around in an erratic manner. I went to the medical kit against the opposite wall and ripped it free, sliding it across the floor to him. It was then that I noticed the table was empty. The blankets, quilts, and plastic wrap remained, along with a puddle of blood. But the girl was gone. Immediately, I drew the handgun from my holster on my waistband and flicked off the safety. Mr. Rousseau paid me handsomely for a great deal of duties, but this wasn't one of them. I backed out the slaughter room and started down the hall for the stairs, stopping short. At the end of the hallway was the girl. Her long black hair hung in front of her pale face. Blood dripped from the hole in her head, along with bits of bone and grey matter. In her right hand was a meat cleaver. In the other was a box cutter with the blade extended a few inches. She stood on a pair of stiff legs. The rigor mortis gave her an awkward gait, one that wouldn't allow her knees to bend as she lurched towards me. Every step creaked as her legs swung, almost throwing herself from one foot to the next. I lifted my pistol and fired. My ears rang with a piercing echo that shook my vision. Once it subsided and I blinked away the distortion, I saw that the bullet had struck her at the center of her chest. The girl paused in her pursuit, glanced down at the bullet wound, and lifted her head again. Bones audibly cracked with every movement. She gazed at me, annoyed but uninjured. Her eyes were wide, clouded with a cataractic milkiness. Then she started towards me again, flailing her arms, slashing wildly as steel blades shaved the concrete walls. Fear pulsed through my heart, radiating into my twisted bowels. You have gotta be fucking kidding me. I aimed the barrel and fired until the gun clicked empty. Well, every bullet lodged inside her torso, but it did little other than stagger her for a moment. I ran in the opposite direction, following the hall deeper into the underground, through the shadows of the corridor into an open room where mutilated carcasses hung from the ceiling. They were covered in a white powder that I later learned was a mixture of quicklime and lye, used to decompose the bodies faster, along with baby powder to help conceal the scent of decay. And yet it lingered, permeating my nostrils and crawling down my throat. The corpses casually swayed on their hooks. Whatever flesh or muscle remained wriggled, festered by a colony of writhing maggots. There were tags clipped to each body, marking them as undesirable with a brief explanation of why. Either they were too bitter, sour, unhygienic, or unqualified, whatever that meant. I didn't have time to read them all. The girl was right behind me, picking up speed and ferocity. I navigated the maze of corpses, pushing some aside in my desperate attempt to escape. Overhead lights flickered and buzzed, casting an array of shadows over the room. One of the corpses came loose and collapsed on top of me, knocking me to the ground. I scrambled out from underneath it and clambered to my feet, but by then the girl had caught up. She pounced at me, her weight knocking me back down to the ground. The cleaver's edge hacked at the stone beside my face. I seized her wrist and twisted it, but the girl didn't feel pain and refused to relinquish her tool. So I yanked and pulled and bashed her hand against the pavement until her fingers were too broken to clutch the handle. That small victory was swiftly disregarded when she came at me with the other hand, slashing my chest with her box cutter. She reeled back and stabbed the razor blade down. I lifted my left hand in front of my face, and the edge of her knife pierced through the flesh and muscle protruding out the other side, slowly descending closer and closer to my eye. A scream escaped my throat, visceral and raw. I grabbed the cleaver with my right hand and swung it into the side of her head with enough force to further erode her exposed scalp. I shoved her aside and scampered away like a wounded pup, stumbling back to my feet. The girl began to convulse and screech. Her voice echoed across the room, whirling around me in several different pitches and inflections. The sound of a dozen different people, all crying at once. Well, before I could convince myself otherwise, I grabbed the handle of the box cutter and yanked it free. My vision blurred around the edges, and a hot, fiery pain crept through the sinews of my left hand. "The meat is spoiled and bitter. It's rotten," the girl cried in a voice that was not her own. "The vessel must be fresh. The kill must be recent. No more decay, no more rot. We need to taste the blood while the heart still palpitates. The feast upon the soul while it still squirms and writhes from within those fleshy confines." She lumbered back onto her feet and pursued me once again. I continued through the room, coming to another dark corridor. But before my eyes could adjust, I was tumbling down a flight of stairs and rolling across a sloped cement floor. My limbs sprawled out around me, the box cutter now a few feet away. Oh, my bones ached, and my head was fuzzy with a probable concussion. My hand burned as a mixture of lye and quicklime from the corpses had spread into the wound. The searing pain was the only thing keeping me awake, keeping me alert. Above, I could hear the girl's strangled movements as she descended the stairs, twisting and turning her hips to accommodate her unbending limbs. Hastily, I crawled across the floor, retrieving the box cutter. Then I reached out into the darkness, searching for something stable. My fingers gripped a jagged rock edge, and I lifted myself to my feet, balancing against what appeared to be a cobblestone well. For a brief moment, I looked into the well, gazing down into the black abyss below. The darkness swirled and churned, unending, a vortex trying to suck me in like an undertow, wishing to pull me down and consume every last morsel of my being. Then a rancid stench wafted over me, one that was unlike anything I'd smelled in my life. It funneled into my nose and mouth, clinging to my taste buds. It was thick and viscous, and felt like poison. Voices called out from the darkness, young and old, man and woman. Their whispers coalesced into a single chant. "Feed me." This went on and on. The voices called for more meat, more blood, more victims, all to satiate a hunger that could not be quelled. Then the girl was running at me, her hands stretched out before her, fingers like claws as they sunk into my neck. I jammed the box cutter's blade into her sternum, dragging and sawing the edge up her stomach, over her chest and into her throat. Guts and organs spilled out from the laceration, intestines draped across her lower half, an organic skirt of bloody ropes. The girl opened her mouth as if to bite me, but before she could, I planted my feet and spun, shoving her over the stone edge and down into the depths of the well. Her body crashed against the bottom with a loud thud. A cacophony of grunts escaped the darkness. Feet padded against stone. And then I heard the sound of chewing and gurgling. Something was eating, and when it had finally stopped, there came a howl. "No!" the voices screamed. "No more rot. No more sting." I backed away from the well, trying to keep the swarm of turmoil at bay, trying to keep myself upright and conscious. It isn't enough. The butcher stood at the bottom of the stairs. His cheek bulged with a mixture of stitches and cotton balls, fastened by a large bandage soaked red with blood. Their taste has developed. It's changed. They'll no longer accept the dead as tribute. They need more. What the hell is down there? I asked. The butcher shook his head. Sorrow filled his gaze. Exhaustion weighed upon his face. Fulfill your duty. Feed the beast. Placate the darkness before it spills out onto the streets and floods the gutters. Before it bubbles to the top and consumes us all. You're insane. There's no room for sanity in a world like this. Not anymore. He lumbered towards me on heavy feet. In one hand was a meat tenderizer, and in the other was a long-bladed knife with a tapered end. His eyes were absent of emotion. I was no more than another carcass waiting to be carved. Part 5. The only viable solution is your meat. The answer is your blood. It's in your blood, the butcher rasped. Let them taste the metal. Let them feast upon the iron coursing through your veins. Let them devour the marrow of your bones, the protein of your muscles, the chemical stew within your brain. It's the only way to keep them pacified. He swung wide with the mallet. I hastily pulled away, feeling a rush of air brush against my face. Then he thrust toward my torso. Sidestepping, I swiped at him with the box cutter, slashing at his leather apron. The butcher growled through gritted teeth and slammed his forehead against mine. It sent me stumbling back against the well, almost falling in. As he brought his mallet down again, I rolled away, and it struck against the stones, sending flakes of dust and debris into the darkness. Pete! The voices chanted from the darkness. Meat! 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 Do you hear their cries? The butcher asked, hacking at me with his knife. They're older than either of us. Your life is nothing in comparison. A speck of sand in the hourglass. Many have died for less. I swung at him again with the box cutter, running the blade's edge down his arm in a curved arc. Blood seeped from the wound, splattering across the basement as he slashed with his knife. Steel glittered against the faint light coming from the room above. A shooting star in the night sky. When the butcher came at me with his mallet again, I leaned out of the way and seized him by the wrist, jamming the box cutter's edge into it, twisting and turning the blade and lacerating the tendons into a bloody mess. The butcher howled and dropped his mallet. Then suddenly his teeth were upon me, sinking into my ear and ripping away bits of flesh. I threw myself against him, and we both stumbled across the room, bumping into the well. He tried to maneuver his knife into my flank, but I slammed my knee against his forearm, crushing it against the well's rocky exterior. I drew my leg back and did this again and again until the bones crunched and his fingers released the handle. The knife clattered to the ground, but before I could seize it, he had his hand around my neck. Feed us, the voices called. Give us his meat. The butcher swung me around. My back slammed against the rim of the well. Sparks of pain shot up and down my spine, spreading across my shoulders. All flesh is grass, the butcher hissed, spit flying with every word. We're no more than lambs to the slaughter, and your time has come, boy. Your chance to feed them, be their sustenance, keep them at bay. Desperately, as black spotters flitted across my vision, I pounded my fist against the butcher's chest. I clawed at his neck, hooking my fingers into the collar of his shirt and stretching the fabric. My eyes fluttered, wishing to close, to dream one last dream before this nightmare finally came to an end. I could feel my strength abandoning me, feel my arms growing weak. Thoughts whirled through the recesses of my mind. Distant things with little stimulation. Images flashed before my eyes. I could see my father handing me the captive bolt gun for the first time, directing my hand so that the barrel pressed against the cow's upper skull, forcing my finger to pull the trigger. Suddenly, I could breathe again, but only for a moment. It was enough to send some of the black spots away. I had one of my hands wrapped around the butcher's mouth now, ripping through the bandage and stitches. My other hand grasped the side of his head, pressing against his ear and the greasy hair. My thumb dug into his eye socket, pushing deeper and deeper as blood pooled around it, slowly trickling down my hand. The butcher opened his mouth to scream, and when his teeth came back down, they clamped against the fingers of my left hand, biting through the skin, bone, and muscle. Oh, he yanked his head to the side, ripping away my pinky and ring finger. Oh, as painful as it was, this brought me more adrenaline, more flowing into my veins, more life into my body. With it came strength, enough to lift my arm and slam it against the pit of his elbow, breaking his hold on me. Then I grabbed the straps of his apron and pulled myself closer to him, close enough to bite down on his nose and rip it away, leaving behind a hole of mucus and cartilage. I could taste the sweat on his skin, the coppery tinge of his blood. First piece of meat I'd eaten since I'd left the farm. As the butcher wailed in anguish, I spit the blood into his eyes, blinding him, distracting him enough to slip away. I made it maybe 2 steps before he had me by the collar of my jacket. At that moment I thought, fuck it. If I was to be meat, to be a sacrifice, might as well do it with some company. He pulled me back and I thrust myself against him. Together we went over the well's edge, plummeting 10, maybe 15 feet into darkness. His body made contact with the ground, cushioning my descent to some degree. When I came to, I was at the bottom of the well, staring at a cove of broken stone filled with scraps of clothes and discarded bones. Ahead, concealed in the shadows, was an irregular mass. I blinked away the fog over my eyes, waiting for them to adjust. That's when I saw it. A tangle of rotted corpses stitched together by threads of spewing black membrane. There were over 100 different eyes grafted to the entity, and each one gazed upon me, pupils dilating with fervent curiosity. An animal still trying to decide whether it should pounce or not. My instincts kicked in, and I stumbled to my feet, leaning against the nearest wall for support while pain gradually coursed through me. The entity propelled itself forward. I raised my right hand and yelled, "Wait!" The entity came to a halt, the darkness within stirring impatiently. "You need me." The wreath of bodies and disjointed limbs began to laugh. "Need you?" "Yeah." I pointed at the butcher, lying broken and unconscious. "He's of no use to you now. You need someone to acquire your meals, to feed you." "Maybe we'll just escape and feed on everyone." "You could do that, but you haven't yet. And I think you know why." I was talking out of my ass, grasping at every last rational thought still available. Anything and everything to make sense of this nonsense. Look, if you were going to go topside, there'd be no one to stop you from feasting upon every last living organism, I said. You'd consume the whole globe, and then there'd be nothing left. No more reproduction, no more sacrifices, no more meat. And eventually you'd starve. You'd be stuck on an empty planet with nothing to satiate your hunger. Look, whether you care to admit it or not, you need temperance, I continued. You need someone to control your appetite. I could do that for you, but he can't. Not anymore. The assembly considered this quietly. Some whispered among themselves, their lips pulled back into a snarl as if it were a heated debate. I watched with morbid fascination as the collection conferred. I couldn't tell whether it was a single-minded entity or multiple consciousnesses stitched together as one. It all felt like a dream that I may never wake from. "We want only fresh meat," the entity resolved. "No more rot, no more decay." I was desperate to escape, desperate to hold on to this frail existence we call life, and so I agreed. "If that's your prerogative, then fine, I can make it happen. I need your help to get out of here. From there, I'll handle the rest." That's when the butcher stirred from his slumber. His eyes rapidly blinked away the vague remnants of unconsciousness. He mumbled under his breath, but before I could make sense of his words, the creature was upon him, pulling him into their mixture of darkness and death. He disappeared into the mass, screaming as the black mucus prized away flesh from the bone, dissolving him no differently than stomach acid. And like that, the butcher was gone. Then the entity was upon me. Several different arms seized my body, hoisting me into the air. I stifled a yelp between clenched teeth, thinking they'd pull me in as well. But instead, they began to scale the cobblestone walls of the well, lifting me out from below and spitting me back onto the basement floor. They paused at the rim, peering over the rocky lip. "We expect great things from you, Butcher. We want sustenance twice every moon cycle. If you fail to uphold your end of the deal, we will not forgive." They then began to descend, sinking back into the abyss. Their voices echoed from within. "And we never forget." I lied there for a while. Couldn't say how long. Time itself seemed frozen. Inside that dank, dark basement, reality had become a distant concern. Society had lost any sense of importance. All those bills and debts and tragic things that come as a natural occurrence of existence were suddenly meaningless. Eventually I picked myself up and sauntered through the underground. I stopped inside the slaughter room to retrieve the med kit from the floor and set it on the counter. I turned on the tap and rinsed my wounds before applying a fair dose of antiseptic solution. It hissed and bubbled with a caustic sting. As tears rolled down my cheeks, I dressed my wounds, applying bandages and sutures where possible. My time at the farm had prepared me in ways I'd never expected. When all was said and done, I took a handful of aspirin, but they did little to numb the pain. Going upstairs and out to the parking lot, I sat in my car and stared at the butcher shop through the rain-streaked windshield. A scream ripped at my throat, but I suppressed it with a fair helping of gin and enough cigarettes to give me a headache. My phone began ringing, so I answered it. "You had that taken care of?" Troy asked. "All good on my end." My voice was frail, barely coherent. "What about you?" "Just finishing up here. It's about as clean as it'll ever get." "Good, great. Look, I'll talk to you later." I hung up and started dialing another number. Rousseau answered after the third ring, but I spoke first. "Your incident has been handled, but there were some issues along the way that'll need to be seen to." I didn't tell him everything because, well, why would I? A hastily explained fabrication sufficed. I told him the butcher had gone mad and attacked me. In the end, I was forced to kill him, but his body, along with the girl, had been disposed of. Then I said something that surprised him, something he didn't quite know how to respond to. "The, shop will be needing a new butcher." I waited a beat, letting it register before adding, "And I'd like to apply for the position." With Rousseau's help, including bribes to city officials and greasing palms of local inspectors, I secured the shop. I've since become the new owner, the sole employee, the butcher on Barker Street. I feed the beast harboring in the belly of the city every full moon, so that no one else has to. I accept the deteriorated corpses of Rousseau's victims, of everyone's victims, and carve them into marketable products to be exchanged for tender. Usually money, but in some cases, favors or feasible sacrifices. Twice a month, I secure a tribute. Someone who won't be missed. Someone the world can forget. Well, it isn't hard to find them. You don't have to look very far. The city is full of inconsequential people. I guess that's a relative affair, though, because in comparison to what lies beneath the surface, none of us truly matter. We are an ignorant society, one composed of distracted individuals placidly going about their lives with little regard for the corruption around them. We're all just servants to a system much larger than ourselves, cogs in a machine dominated and operated by shadows. The reach of its corruption spreads wide and far. It sinks its teeth into every establishment, whether we notice it or not. We try to ignore it, try to blind ourselves through menial means such as alcohol or narcotics or reading or any other form of entertainment. But the truth is there. It's always been there. Between the threads of our own self-sewn veils, we are sustenance to satiate the hungry. Some of us serve, some of us eat. But in the end, we all become no more than meat. Well, be honest with me, my dear friends. You didn't see that coming, did you? Started out as something and turned into something completely different halfway through. Yeah, that one was very entertaining. A little bit more bloodthirsty and gory than I usually read, but hey, I know you guys can deal with it every now and again. Well, that was a bizarre story, wasn't it? What did you think of it? Thoughts, feelings, anything else you want to say in the comment section below the video, and as ever, I will do my best to join in the conversation. Now, that was something of a treat for your Monday evening's entertainment, and I'll be back again. Podcast on the second channel tomorrow, back here on Wednesday with a 2-hour story. Not quite sure which one yet, but going to be 2 hours long. I know you like the longer ones. Then on Thursday, back over for another podcast. Oof. Then Friday back here. Oh, my week is just full already. Still love doing this for you all though, and I know that you still appreciate the stories. So my dear friends, you'll sleep well, and remember, it's just a story, isn't it? Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story today. Really means a lot to me and to the author of the story, of course. Well, if you want to know more about me, I'm pretty much everywhere on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can download my music on SoundCloud. I've got a Patreon if you feel like. Throw me $1 or $2. Very much appreciated. And of course, on Reddit, I have a place where you can leave stories if you want me to read one that you've written. Well, hoping to see you all again very soon. Till then, sweet dreams. Bye-bye.